Well, hello. This is the board that we will be producing in this next video that we'll be pouring. It's not shiny or anything yet because I'm in the middle of doing the final sanding and finishing. I have a few steps to go. I'm up to like 120 grit. I usually go up to somewhere around 2,000 grit, and then I do polishing so that it'll be nice and clear. So this doesn't give you a good representation, but if you watch a video series, you'll see what it's going to look like as I get the polish on it. What I want to talk about is in this video, I'm going to talk about how I use my resin calculator, my spreadsheet that I'm making available to others in calculating the volume of epoxy I'm going to need. Typically, if you're doing a River Charcuterie Board, most people will just make one color, which means that's one pour that you have to calculate the amount of epoxy that will fill this river. That's the normal process. If you're trying to do something a little more fancy, where you have a different color on the bottom and then you put something in it, like I'm going to do with this board, I'm going to put river rocks in it. If you're going to do that, you need two calculations. One for the first color of epoxy, in this case it's blue down here, and the other one for the clear epoxy that you're going to pour over the top. In this video, I'm going to cover both of those. One, to calculate how much epoxy you need for the first pour. The other one is how to calculate the epoxy for the second pour. And then I'll share with you how you would calculate the amount of epoxy if all you were doing was one pour. With that, let's go into how I use the spreadsheet and walk through that process.
Before we get into the actual spreadsheet, I wanted to review from the earlier video how we calculated the average width of the epoxy channel. We took 3 different measurements for the possibility that I'd want to do 2 different layers of epoxy pours. The first measurement we took was at the very bottom, as pointed out by that large black arrow up there. The second average width measurement we took was at 1/4 inch up because I knew that's where I would shoot for the first layer to end. And the third measurement we took was at the very top of the board. We calculated the average width of each of those areas, and that's what we're going to use on this spreadsheet. With that, let's go ahead and get started into the spreadsheet. For those of you that have been watching my videos for a while, you may recognize this spreadsheet or a version of it because about a year or two ago when I first started making videos on multicolor epoxy pours, I offered this spreadsheet as a free file for those that are interested. I still get requests from those earlier videos, but I've now updated this file to incorporate changes for doing river epoxy pours and also for other epoxy brands and ratios that have come up as I've worked with epoxy over the last few years. So let me just do a quick overview of what's in this spreadsheet so you'll understand how to use it. The spreadsheet is broken into a couple different sections. The first section that you see here at the top are various ratio calculations that I've come up with based on different epoxies I've used. I've tried to be clear about whether it's a volume ratio or a weight ratio in the title. So if you look up here at it says at the top left here, it says weight resin measurement 1 to 0.83. The one next to it says epoxy for a 1 to 5 mixture calculation by volume. And the one over on the right here says a 1 to 2 mixture calculation by volume. If you go down below, you'll see one that says a 1 to 1 ratio by, it should say by volume. Let me make that change right now so it's clear. And the next one you see says a Moss LV epoxy by weight. So this is a weight measurement. So we have 2 of them that are weight measurements based on technical specifications from the manufacturer, and the rest are volume measurements. Now that we know how to use the top of this form, let's talk about the bottom. So I've developed a section specifically for doing river charcuterie pours, at the top here, and then down below I have other calculations from my previous videos on how to do multicolor epoxy pours, etc., how to do a flood coat calculation. I'm not going to go through that at this time. If we look at the first part for the River Charcuterie Board, we start with our form calculation. We put the width and the length of the form in, and then we have the thickness of the pour, whichever thickness it is that we're going to be doing. So in the case of a one color pour for a River Charcuterie Board, this would be the total thickness of the slab, which would equal the total thickness of the pour. Or if I'm going to do a multicolor epoxy pour like I do in the example for this series of videos, I will have one thickness, say at 1/4 inch, and the next thickness being the difference between 1/4 inch and the thickness of the slab. So this information will feed all of the rest of these tables and formulas. Let's take a look at those. The first thing I want to do is figure out how much wastage epoxy I'm going to have. You're going to have epoxy seep around the sides of the form and between the form and the wooden slab, and you're going to have epoxy that slides underneath the slab. With that, then we want to figure out how much epoxy we need to mix up by taking into consideration the waste. The waste calculation is coming directly from this form calculation up here and how thick we're pouring it. So this formula is in here, just so you know what's in here, is it's looking at the width and the length, and then it's assuming that there's a 1/16 inch leakage, and then it goes through and does volume calculations and says 7.5 ounces is going to be wasted on the bottom of the epoxy pour, and on the sides it's taking a look at the sides and how thick the pour is, which is coming from up here, and assuming that 1/16 of an inch will leak all around the side areas, and that's how you come up with this number for a total wastage calculation, in this case of 10, based on a slab thickness or pour of 1.0625 inches. Hopefully I'm not getting lost in the weeds, but you don't need to do anything in this part of the form once you filled out the above information. The next part of the form is pretty self-explanatory, especially for a one color pour. So let's assume we've got a one color pour, and that's what's in the top layer here. The key thing you have to be able to do is know how to calculate the average width of the river channel, which I covered in an earlier video. If you're having any questions about how to calculate the average width of the river, that's where you need to go look, is in that video. So in this case, we're going to assume one color. The average width in the example board that we're doing is 5.1 inches, and the rest of this will then calculate out and will tell you the ounces of epoxy you need without waste for that pour is 54 ounces. When you figure in waste, you need 64 ounces of epoxy. So once you have that number, you're going to take that 64 and you're going to go to the correct ratio up above here, and in this case it's a 1:2 ratio for the epoxy, so I'm going to put 64, and as you can see, 64 doesn't come out with even numbers of resin and hardener, which makes it hard to visualize or see in the mixing buckets. So what you're going to want to do is change this number, and I always change it up because I'd rather have more than less, to a number where you get even amounts that you can see in the mixing buckets. So what you want to do is experiment with that number by putting in those numbers, and it's going to be an even number of some sort. So I'm going to start with 66, and it worked. So we got 66 total ounces, which is more than the minimum we need with wastage, and you can see it says we need 44 ounces of resin and 22 ounces of hardener for a total volume of resin of 66 ounces if I was doing a one color pour. Now let's go look at the next example, the one I'm using in this set of videos, which is where I do a 1/4 inch pour and then I do the rest with clear. So when I'm doing that, I need to change what I'm doing up on top here. And the first thing I need to do is say how thick is my pour going to be. And it's going to be 0.25 inches. I don't need to do anything here because it all carries over from up here. And then I go to my 1/4 inch layer, and I know at a 1/4 inch, in my example, the average width of the river was 4.1 inches. I had already calculated that from before. You can see that with a 1/4 inch pour, it needs 10 ounces of epoxy. Now don't get fooled by these other number changes because they're all being changed when I change the 1/4. So this number changed. Don't get confused the fact that this looks different now. This number actually changed because it was driven by this formula. So now it says I need 10 ounces of epoxy. And I have total wastage of 8 ounces, so I need 18 ounces of total epoxy for the 1/4 inch pour of my board. So in that case, I will come in here and I will do 18 ounces. And you can see it says I need 12 ounces of resin and 6 ounces of hardener for a total of 18 ounces. The rest of the pour then after a 1/4 inch, remember my original board was 1.0625 inches thick. So if I want to figure that out, I'll take 1.0625 inches and I'll minus the 0.25 inches that I already poured. And now I have another wastage calculation. And I know that the remaining layer, average width of the epoxy, I did all that when I was doing the average width calculations, is 5.1 inches. Notice this went to 0.8125. And I know that my total epoxy needed now is 50 ounces of epoxy for the remaining clear color. So I come up here and I put in 50. And we go through the process again of going up by even amounts. 52, and then we go to 54, and now we have 36 and 18, and we have the epoxy we need for the clear color pour. That's all there is to it, and I know there's a lot of math and stuff, and I'm trying to take all the math out of it by putting these formulas in. If you have any questions, give me a comment or send me an email at robsandstromdesigns@gmail.com, and I will answer your questions if you have any follow-up questions.
Well, we just finished the video on how to use a spreadsheet to calculate the volume of epoxy. It's pretty straightforward, but anytime you get into numbers and calculations, it can be a little bit intimidating for some people and confusing. Hopefully, we took away the mystery out of it. And if you want my spreadsheet, as I said, all you need to do is send me an email. I'll put the email link in the video description, and I'll send you my spreadsheet for free. If you think I deserve it, please give me a like with a thumbs up and comment on my video to get it out in front of more people, or share it with some people. That would be really terrific. And if you're not already subscribed, subscribe to the channel so that you can get future videos when I release them, not only on this process, but all the other things that I release videos on. Until we meet in this medium again, I'm wishing you the best. I hope this video series, if you're watching it, is giving you enough confidence to get out there and make your own River Charcuterie Board. That would be awesome. And if you do, send me a picture. I'd love to see it.